Howdy everyone, and welcome to Big Orange Biology. It's your boy, Mr. Jennings, and in today's video, we're going to talk about epinephrine. So, class is now in session. So, epinephrine is one of these classic chemical molecules that we talk about in biology, especially in AP biology, because it does a lot. And it's really a great example of how one chemical signal can generate a whole variety of responses, all dependent on the location received. So one ligand can elicit so many different responses that it's actually a great example of a lot of variety that can happen. See, epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, originates from the adrenal gland. Now, the adrenal gland is located right near the kidneys, and this is associated actually with the classic fight or flight response, also known as the fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, a lot of people do associate epinephrine with allergic reactions. Common medical treatments to deal with anaphylactic shock is an EpiPen, because EpiPens contain epinephrine. It's going to give a strong dose, and once you inject it, it actually helps reverse the effects of that. Now we're going to talk about why it does that a little bit, but main thing we're going to focus on is how one chemical can actually elicit many different responses. So to understand what this chemical does, we need to understand its main pathway. See, it first starts off with your sensory organs, your eyes, ears, nose. So the body's going to pick up a threat with those sensory organs, and it's going to pass a signal on to the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is this little region right here in the brain. It's kind of a control center. Now, once the hypothalamus receives a signal from the receives a signal from those sensory organs, it's going to do two things. One, it's going to send a chemical signal to another gland called the pituitary gland, which is located right about here. At the same time, the hypothalamus, as it's sending the chemical signal to the pituitary gland, it's going to send another message through the nervous system all the way down to the adrenal glands. Now, while the pituitary gland is receiving this signal, it's going to send a chemical signal itself. It's like, okay, we got something going on here. There's a threat. Pituitary gland is going to send a chemical out to the adrenal glands, to the bloodstream, at the same time as the electrical impulse, and it's going to elicit a response from the adrenal glands. Now, the adrenal glands are going to begin secreting epinephrine. Now, what happens next is that epinephrine is actually going to promote a variety of different chemicals, namely cortisol, which is going to help promote that signal further. So we have one signal of epinephrine. It's going to cascade out, and it's going to be amplified, and cortisol is one of these amplification chemicals. Now, cortisol does a bunch of other responses as well. Now, the type of response that the cell has to epinephrine or cortisol depends on where those are received. See, different organs and different tissues do different things. Because remember, cells are highly specialized. So the cell structure is going to determine the cell's function. So while the receptor may be highly specific to cortisol or epinephrine, more likely epinephrine because cortisol can be in through the membrane. But while the receptors are highly specific to those chemicals, what the cell does after receiving the signal is highly dependent, because the signal receiving, structures are largely universal. The G protein coupled receptor that epinephrine uses is largely the same throughout all various organisms. It's what happens once the enzyme has been activated that matters. So, what happens with epinephrine? So, epinephrine is a great example of a GPCR or GELR, depending on what form you want to use here. So, epinephrine acts as a ligand. It's going to go over here and attach itself to the G protein coupled receptor, which is then going to activate the G protein by phosphorylating the GDP into GTP. Now, once the GTP activated G protein is activated, it's going to go to this little enzyme here known as adenyl cyclase. Adenyl cyclase is going to then activate the secondary messenger cyclic AMP by dephosphorylating ATP all the way down to AMP. So cyclic or CAMP is going to go here, and that's going to then initiate a bunch of protein kinases, which then can spread off to either do a couple different things. And we'll talk about what those are. So cortisol and epinephrine are responsible for a variety of things to deal with the flight or fight response, which is it needs to increase a tremendous amount of energy, and also it needs to get that energy molecules faster through the body. So it's going to increase blood pressure by pumping the veins harder. It's going to constrict the veins so it goes faster. It's going to increase the blood flow. It's also going to increase blood sugar. And all this is going to be happening on at the same time. It's actually going to suppress the immune system. So this is kind of one of the reasons if you're highly stressed, you tend to get sicker, is because, well, the immune system is not as effective when adrenaline and cortisol are running through the veins. So as your blood pressure is going up, your blood sugar is going up, this is all will help promote the form of energy and strength. You've heard people having hysterical strength, like the ability to lift cars off small children. That's because of epinephrine. Epinephrine sends signals to the muscles. They're going to contract a lot harder. You're going to have more energy available because when you increase blood flow, you're going to increase more oxygen flow. You're going to increase more blood sugar to those areas. That means you're going to promote more cellular respiration. All sorts of things happen because of this one chemical and its intermediates. So some examples of epinephrine's responses. And these are all various locations. First off, the liver. That's one of the first places it's going to hit. When it hits the liver, it's going to help promote the release of glucose by the breakdown of larger sugar and starch molecules. That's what we're seeing right here. So it's going to promote the inhibition of glycogen, which is what glucose is stored in. And it's going to promote the breakdown of glycogen. And glycogen is where, again, glucose is stored in animals. So it's going to help promote the breakdown of large molecules into smaller sugar molecules like glucose. Also, at the same time, cortisol is going to help promote the release of fatty acids that are found in lining the body to help release more energy, because then now the fatty acids can now be metabolized. And as we know, fatty acids have more metabolization to it. They have more energy. Now, that's just what the liver does. Now, when epinephrine hits the lungs, it causes the muscles to relax and also absorb more oxygen gas into the blood. So your blood becomes more oxygenated. There's like this low-scale hyperventilating, not like you're having a panic attack necessarily. It can now extenuate to that. But you're going to start breathing faster. Your body's like, hey, we need to move, or we need to fight, or we need some energy, we need some strength. So we need to get more oxygen. More oxygen means more cellular respiration. And more blood flow means we can get rid of the CO2 faster, so we keep getting more oxygen in. All that's happening because of epinephrine. Now, epinephrine is also going to cause the heart to stimulate the pacemaker in your heart, and it's going to cause it to beat faster. So it's going to increase the blood flow. That's also in addition to narrowing the blood passages. That's usually due to another secondary intermediate. But so the blood vessels are getting more narrow. You're getting more oxygen. Your heart's going to beat faster. It's going to send more blood to those areas. It's going to go at a faster rate because of the narrowing passages and all that's going on. Now, this thing goes to the muscles. Now, this can cause muscles, particularly near the skin, to tense up, but actually throughout the body. You're finding your muscles are going to get tighter. They're going to get ready to act, and they're going to get really excited. So the muscles are going to get excited. They're going to tense up. If you, your body hair is going to start standing up because of dissipation. And you're going to start sweating more because your body is going to generate more energy, and it's going to start promoting sweat to help cool you off. All these are happening just because of one chemical. Just remember, the secretion of epinephrine, and as it goes throughout the body, it's eliciting all these different responses from the same chemical. And cortisol is also having an effect here, and another chemical known as norepinephrine, but they're all largely in the same group. So all this is happening because of epinephrine. Epinephrine is what releases the cortisol. Epinephrine is going to help release the norepinephrine. All this is happening because of one chemical. So the conclusion really here is that when it comes to epinephrine, it's a multifaceted signal, and it's a great model system. So a lot of chemicals in your body have a lot of multiple functions. Because if we had to have a singular ligand for every chemical response we needed, every cellular response, every cell communication, there would be too much of that, and it's terribly inefficient. So it turns out the body has adapted various ways to take the same chemical and do many different things with that chemical, and that is a very vital process. All right, so be sure you take note of that in your notes if you haven't already. Hopefully you have written down some facts about epinephrine. You may want to draw the pathways. Go back in the video and watch that, look at the pathways, or look one up online. Just get familiar with how epinephrine works, because it's a great example, and it's one of the College Boards explicitly states as an excellent example of one signal, multiple responses. And we'll elaborate more on this in the